So I'll call this City Council work session discussing setting goals for the electric rate study and discuss electric utility department line clearing policy to order on December 14th. So before we get started, we're going to connect at least 2 council members. And then was someone else was going to be on the line too?
Mike Hubbard.
Yeah, we're gonna call him in.
Welcome to G. Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, please enter. You will now be placed into conference. There are 3 participants in the conference.
So if I could have the folks that just got connected to the meeting identify themselves. I know it's a little awkward, so maybe I'll call out. Is Councilmember Cease on the line?
Yes, I am.
And
Can
then,
you hear me?
yes, thank you. And then Councilmember Casagrande.
Are you live too? I can't get on to get YouTube on it.
It is.
So there's probably
Oh, here,
just
never
a,
mind, I see it.
yes.
Never mind, I see it.
Thank you. I think there's a lag, which is a bummer. But Councilmember Casagrande, are you online?
Here.
And then I'll let the last person identify, please. Oh no, you're the third. Okay. And then, Madam Clerk, as we're moving into this, did anyone ask to be called for comments or submit comments?
We don't have anyone on the call list tonight.
Okay, thank you. And then you're connecting for
Mike Hubbard.
Mike Hubbard. Okay.
Mike over here.
Mike, hi, it's Brendan Ballou. You are with City Council and we're just about to start the work session.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'll turn it over to you, Corey,
Yes.
to manage and lead. Thank you very much for this tonight, and I'll just let you kick it off.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor and council members that are here and on the phone. I appreciate your time, this opportunity. We're going to try to be prompt and efficient with our time. I'd like maybe to have this discussion go about 40 minutes and then leave 10, maybe 15 minutes for the right-of-way clearing and give you a break before your 7 p.m. meeting. So, but we don't want to short any questions you might have. So, you know, this is a really important task that you have as a city council. You're kind of the rate making. You're like a regulatory commission here, having to do something that's called make fair and equitable rates for the members that live in the city and then live outside the city as well. And it's also interesting because as city council, you are kind of like the board of directors of the utility. So you got interest in making sure that the utility is run well, has the finances to make sure that it is maintained properly, and you have outages and problems with power being supplied to our customers. So it's a very interesting and important task that you have before you here as we go into rates. And I know you've gone through rate making with the water and sewer utility, and you're probably fairly well educated on it, but we want to spend a little bit of time as it relates to the electric utilities so that you have a little bit of understanding. But the real purpose of this meeting is for us to hear from you what your concerns are about rates as they currently exist, what you think you want to achieve with these rates, what, you know, how important it is, how important is reliability to you, how important is cost to you, how important it is for renewable energy and what you're willing to allow to be passed through and encourage renewables in this community. Those are all policy decisions that are properly with you as a city council, and we want to make sure you have a voice and we listen to you as we go forward. So over the last number of weeks, Mike Hubbard has been collecting all the data he needs. I don't have anything to tell you where it stands or anything else like that, but we wanted to get some input from you so that we are making sure we've got all the data and everything we need to answer all of your questions and give you the information you need to make this decision. Just a little bit what's going to happen after this is that after we hear from you and we have this, this meeting, I'm going to start some citizen engagement. I'm putting groups together of folks that of different classes. I've talked to some of the folks interested in renewables. I've got the industrials. Of course, I hear from them. They're in my office quite a bit, talking to me. We need people who are interested in our seniors, people on fixed incomes. We need to hear from them how important these rates are, and the fact that we need to be really prudent to make sure they can afford their electric bills that are coming. So we're going to have a significant community engagement to also hear what the community says about rates. It's also an opportunity for us to educate them about the importance of the utility and making sure that while we're all worried about rates and costs, that there are enough revenues to make sure that this utility can move forward and do well and be reliable. So I'm gonna turn over to Mike Hubbard. We've got a deck of pages to cover, and he's going to be fairly quick, but we again want to thank you for your time today, and then leave time for questions before we're done here. So with that, Mike, with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, so as Corey said, we're going to kind of go through this pretty fast here. We have about 10 slides or so, and some of them I'll take a little bit more time on, and others we'll just kind of skip through. But on slide 2, what we're going to be talking about tonight is, first of all, I think it's important that you kind of understand the cost structure of a utility. And it may somewhat surprise you just a little bit, and because of that cost structure, that is why we have to do cost of service studies. And I'm going to show you an example to kind of help, kind of illustrate why we have to do those. And then I'll quickly talk about how we do them. And I'm certainly not going to make you an expert on it, but just kind of give you a flavor for it. And then some of the goals that, when it comes over to the council itself, what are the goals that the council wants to think about and implement as we do these studies? And then, as Corey said, we talk about alternative energy, and then going forward, what the status is of our rate study and some of the upcoming decisions. So, slide 3, we're going to now go into the cost structure. And if you look at this table here, or look at this chart, you'll see that there's a number of functions that a utility has where the costs are lumped in. So generation, transmission, distribution, customer accounts, administrative costs, and in those administrative costs you might have things like debt service, depreciation, and your admin costs of other city workers and so on. So those can be thought of as either somewhat fixed or variable. And when I say variable, what I'm talking about on that is it variable based on how many sales you have, how many kilowatt hours you are selling. Certainly all these costs are somewhat variable in the sense that, say, labor, well, you might be able to lay off somebody, or you would, through attrition, not have as many people there. So that could be, somewhat variable. But for the most part, once you have your staff there, once you have your infrastructure in place and everything, most of those costs, you'll look down there, and most of those costs are fixed. The only one that we have that is somewhat variable is the fuel. Fuel for generation, if you're generating your own power, or if you're purchasing power from, as you are, from Chugach, how many customers you have. If you have a new customer or a new subdivision going in someplace, you're going to have to add infrastructure for that. And also it's dependent on the size of customers. If you have a large customer, you're going to have to put in larger facilities. So all of these things go into, and you'll see here in a little bit, this goes into how we do a cost of service study. But the takeaway from this is that given the utility size, most of your expenses are fixed, and they do not vary with the amount of sales. And so that's a very important thing that you have to remember, because as you go forward, if you have a low year of sales, you still have to recover pretty much the same amount of cost, of revenues to meet those costs.
Mike, can
Next slide, I want to give you just a
Do you
little
want me to
bit of
interrupt
an
him?
example.
Hey, Mike, Corey had a comment really quick.
Why we have to
I'll get it.
do these things.
Hey, Mike?
Yep.
Hey, I just wanted to, I have to interrupt you, sorry. I just wanted to kind of give you a big picture to look for your utility, and maybe you know this from all your budgeting work, but the revenues for Stewart Electric are about $12 million a year. And I'm looking at this year, revenues are still at about 12 million. What we're finding, by the way, is that with everyone homeschooling and everyone got their kids home with computers on, we're getting a lot of residential sales. And our expenses run about 11 million, and the Chugach bill is like $5 million of that. It's a big chunk. So and that will vary depending on how much we sell, but we still have $6 million of expense. $1 million is our administrative expense, which is charged out to the city because the utility desk and accounting and HR, everyone at the city provides the services. So that bill is about $1 million a year. We put $360,000 a year into the vehicle pool, so we have vehicles that we need. So anyway, there's a lot of revenues to this utility. I guess I wanted to bring that up, but a big chunk of that is our cost of power, which does get billed to the customer on a pass-through only. We don't take, members always, or customers always think, oh, you're adding onto the cost of power. No, the Chugach bill comes in and we bill it back. There's a little bit of a balancing account that goes on, and sometimes we're under-collected what we need to make sure that we're getting squared up at the end of the day. But the Chugach bill is a pass-through without any adders to it. All right, sorry, Mike, just wanted to add that.
Okay, no problem. And right now, on slide 4, I'm going to give you an example. And in my haste to get through here, because I know time is short, I should have given you just a quick history of me. And I live in Maine right now, but I used to live in Alaska, and I lived in Alaska for 18 years and had my own practice there for most of those years, and worked with utilities throughout the state. And then I moved to Maine, and I still continue to work with my utilities in Alaska. And I'm starting to kind of wind down my practice now. But when I give this example, you may kind of laugh and you go, who in their right mind would have the same energy rate for all their customers? And because you guys have different rates for each of your rate classes and so on, but there are a number of utilities here in Maine that have, small utilities, that have the same rate for all customer classes, and I keep on telling them they are not fair. and uses 500,000 kilowatt hours per year. So in essence, what it's doing is it's using pretty much a constant amount of energy or demand all in every hour. So it is paying 50%. If you have the same energy rate for all customers, it is paying for 50% of the cost, but it only represents 26% of the system demand and 1% of the number of customers. And as we saw in a previous slide here, we saw that some of these costs that the utility incurs is based on the number of customers you have, is based on how large your system peak is. So this customer here is paying probably more than his fair share. Then take another example of where you have another customer that has the same demand of 60 kilowatts but only uses 100,000 kilowatt hours per year. In other words, it uses a lot maybe at certain times, and the rest of the year it doesn't use hardly any at all. So again, if you have the same energy rate, it's only paying 10%, but it represents 26% of the system demand. So these two customers are paying the same rate, yet they're influencing the cost structure of the utility in different ways. So this is why we do cost of service studies. We try and lump everybody that has similar usage patterns. We put them into the same customer classes or rate classes, and then we allocate the utility's cost to each of those rate classes. And I want to stress that it is not an exact science, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what we're trying to do is make it such that the customers pay their fair share. If we go on to the next slide, slide 5, on how we perform these, we're doing it such that we perform it such that the cost causer is the cost payer. That's the buzzword, the buzz phrase that we use in rate making. And the way we perform a cost of service study is we do it through a multi-step process. And if you were rate regulated by the RTA, you would have to have this cost of service study done using the NARUC manual, which is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Back in the 80s, they put out a manual on how costs should be allocated. It was updated in the 90s, and so if you were rate regulated by the RTA, you would have to have a cost of service study performed using that NARUC manual. You're not rate regulated, but we do still use that NARUC manual in how we allocate the costs and perform the cost of service study. It's a like I say, it's not an exact science, but there is a rhyme or reason, and it makes the goal is not only to have the cost causer be the cost payer, but it's fair and equitable. And so what we do is we take our revenue requirements, we functionalize them, be it their generation or transmission, distribution, customer accounts, and admin and other. That's done through your accounting process. If you look at your budget, you'll see a lot of line items, and that does the functionalization for it. We then take those functionalized costs and we classify them. And we classify them either as relating to coincidence peak. Now, coincidence peak is a rate class, what their peak is matter what no matter if it coincides with the system peak or not. In customer accounts, we classify those typically as customers, and admin and other, we typically classify those as a number of things based on labor and other factors. We then take those classified revenue requirements and we allocate them to each class based on their contribution to that classifier. So in other words, if one class, say residential, had 20% of the total energy requirements, they would get 20% of the energy-related, or those costs that are classified as energy. If the coincident peak was 15% of your system peak, they would get 15% of the costs that are classified as coincident peak, and so on. Now, energy and customers are pretty easy, but when it comes to figuring out what a class's coincident peak is and non-coincident peak is, there's lots of load research that's done for that, and for a small utility like you cannot afford to do that. And so what I have done, and I have been before the commission in Alaska doing this, is that we tag off of other utilities research, load research. Obviously, it has to be, that utility that we're tagging off of has to be somewhat similar to yours. And so the closest one right now is the old MLC. But we look at all others too. But you're not going to be using somebody's thing in Fairbanks because of the difference in weather, climate, and so on. But I've done this before the commission for a rate-regulated or several rate-regulated utilities, and the commission has felt that is, they understand that we can't go out and do all this load research, and so they're fine with this. And as I said, that these are not exact sciences, and so when we come down to the final product, what we will do is we will look at and we will say, okay, now that we've classified, now that we've allocated all these costs to all the ratepayers, all these rate classes, we're now going to calculate the revenues we receive with the existing rate. And how close are those revenues to the allocated costs? And because this is not an exact science, to me, anything in the 10% range, or maybe even higher, 10 to 15% range, is now you're pretty close. But I mean, if we're talking about your 40%, 50% way off, then that's indicative of something has to be done to that rate if we want the cost causer to be the cost payer. So, slide 6. Now that you know why we do it, how we do it, what are some of the goals that you that are have to be thought of as we go through these studies? Well, the first thing is you have to maintain the reliability and the financial health of your utility. Nobody likes to raise rates, but if that's what it takes to maintain your utility, then that's what has to be done. So that gets into the overall revenue requirements. The length of time that the rates are expected to be in effect. Are we going to put a rate into effect that's good for 1 year and come in next year and do it again, and next year do it again? Now, maybe we might want to put it in, so it's in effect for, say 3 years or something like that. Is it a fair and reasonable rate? And that, gets to the results. Because the rate class is existing rates are, say, 50% less than its allocated costs, well, then you can say it's not really fair. And that goes into the cost causer, the cost payer. Another thing that needs to be considered is what happens, or what about the low income or the elderly on fixed income? Are we going to have a special rate for that, or take those into account? And then we get into, are we going to encourage conservation and alternative energy? And I'm going to touch on that here in just a minute here. And are we going to provide for energy conservation efforts in order to promote more efficient use of our facilities? And that is such that, well, if our system demand is increasing so much, maybe we need to put something in place such that we don't have to build that larger transmission interconnection or something like that. You see that here in Maine quite a bit for some of the island communities where their old cables are now about ready to go out, and do we need to put something in such that we don't have to rebuild the transmission to the mainland quite so much? And then there may be other goals that you might want to consider. So let's go on to slide 7 and talk about alternative energy for a minute. If your rates are regulated by the RPA, which they are not, but if they were, the larger utilities must provide net metering to a customer for green energy. And what that means is, if during the month the customer just generates surplus energy, more than they use from an alternative energy source, the utility must credit that customer. And in Alaska, what that credit is equal to the surplus times the non-firm energy rate. In other words, if that utility is producing its own power, and let's say it's burning gas to produce that power, then it comes up with what its rate just to produce, what's that gas, what's the cost to produce that kilowatt hour, when it's just looking at the fuel. In other states, it's even more generous. And I can tell you here in Maine, because I do personally have a solar installation in my house here, and if I generate more than I use, then I get a credit. And my bill is offset not only by the fuel surcharge or the fuel charge, but it's also offset by the delivery charge. So I'm getting a credit for the entire bill. And that credit, it rolls over, and it goes for, that credit builds up for 12 months. And so it's very generous here. Whereas in Alaska, you're only giving them credit for the non-firm energy rate. However, it does not expire under the Alaska law, whereas here in Maine, it does expire after 12 months. The thing to keep in mind, the very important thing to keep in mind with alternative energy and the net metering is that they are, a person that puts in alternative energy is going to reduce its payment to the utility. Not only for the fuel, but it's also going to get credit for it's not producing power, or it's not taking the energy at certain times of the day, and it's not going to pay that distribution charge. In have to, kind of keep that in mind. And again, I have a client here in Maine that I had a call with today that they have a very large customer that's putting in alternative energy. They put in a big solar farm. And what that's going to do is it's going to reduce this utility. It's a small utility, and it's going to reduce their revenues, and it's going to harm the other ratepayers. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. Like I say, that we want to promote it, but we don't want to get into the position where it is harming those people that can't afford to put in these alternative energy projects. So the next slide, slide 8, just kind of shows you, this is the Alaska Administrative Code on net metering, and down at the bottom, it does say that it does not expire, the credits do not expire or otherwise revert to the electric utility. So if they continue to, if the customer continues to generate more than they use, it does not run out. So these credits last forever. Next slide, going forward. We are now performing the cost of service study. I made a first cut at it. We had the model. I performed this study for you in the past, so we had the model somewhat in place. I had to update it some. I have the 2021 budget in there. I'm still waiting for data from city staff on a couple of things before we can really finalize it. But we are getting somewhat close. And this investigation will include not only the existing rate classes, but will also look at the elimination of the special contracts and establishing an industrial rate. What it will show, the end results will show by rate class the overall revenue requirement. It will show how that was based, what it was based on. Right now, I have in the 2021 budget, but we're going to have to put in some amount for a target margin or a return on rate base, if you will, because you don't want to set your rates just equal to revenue requirements, because you need to have some sort of a cushion in there. But it will show you the revenue requirements. It will show you the allocated revenue requirements to each rate class, and it will show you the revenues collected under the existing rates by each rate class, and therefore you will be able to see how close the existing rates are to each allocated cost of service. And so you can tell whether or not should we raise this rate or should we drop this rate, and so on. And again, like I say, and you'll have a written report that will show this, but again, it's not exact science, so I mean, if it's within 10% or so, I mean, it's going to be relatively good. So, next slide, the council, what are your decisions that you're going to have to face? Again, what are we going to base the revenue requirements on? And is it going to be in the 2021 budget, or will it be something else? And what I will do is, you'll see as we go forward here, you'll see, okay, well, if it's based on this, it means this, but if we're going to raise the revenue requirements or raise the budget by X amount, this is what it does to rate. So you'll have the tools necessary to make some of these decisions. You also will have to provide guidance on how long these rates are going to be in effect. In the past, you've done a CPI increase every year. I've argued against that in the sense that if you don't need it, why raise it? Why raise the rates, you need to hold the utility feet to the fire. That's what the budget process is all about. But at the same time, you have to, make sure that if you need to do the revenues, then you need to raise the rates. So, it's probably, I would say 3 years or so is kind of what you want these rates to be in effect. And that goes into what's the target return. And if we go in with a revenue requirement with no target return, then I would say that rate is only going to be in effect for 1 year. But if we do have something that's built in there, it can last for more than 1 year. And you're going to have to, will we accept a rate adjustment or rate increase? Or are we going to say no increase whatsoever? Or hold it to CPI or something like that? But again, you have to remember, what is the financial health of the utility? And then we'll be looking at a new industrial rate and discontinuing the special contracts, and that, I can't tell you if that's going to be good or bad to the special contracts. Haven't run the numbers yet, so I can't tell you. But that's going to be, a point of discussion as we come along. And, are there going to be any special rate classes? Do we have an industrial rate, or do we have, might even have something else that you can think of? And finally, are we going to have rates that encourage alternative energy? And should there be a net metering policy? And to that, we look at implementing high customer charges. That's what utilities are going through nationwide. They're increasing their customer charge such that if a customer starts to self-generate for part of their power, but the utility is on the hook to provide them the rest of the power, and infrastructure is still there, the utility needs to recover its revenue. So they're implementing higher customer charges. So we kind of may want to look at that, but that adversely affects the low-income people. So again, it's a balancing account. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong way through this. But it's just kind of what you're going to, the goals that you want to implement and as we go forward. So that was quick. No decisions now, I don't think, but I leave that to Corey.
Questions?
So you're right on time with the promises. I'm going to check on the phone. I'll start with Councilmember Casagrande. Do you have any questions?
I do. One of the things that maybe can come up in this rate study, we used to have a meter reader, and there was a charge that, I think it was the customer charge that was directly funding the cost of that position. And then we got the electrical meters, and that position went away, but that charge never went away. And so I'd just like some more information and background on that. Now that we don't have a meter reader, what is that charge being used for? There's also a charge that goes, I think I found in code directly to the generator. And so if we could just have more understanding of that customer charge, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. I don't know that we'll have that fleshed out tonight, but maybe.
Very good comments. Thank you. We'll make sure we get them addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Casagrande, did you have any other questions? You can't see perhaps, but Corey is taking notes, so those will be followed up on.
That's it for now, and I will brainstorm possibly some more and email them through the mayor to the city manager to Corey.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. Councilmember Cease, did you have any questions?
No, I don't, thank you.
Thank you. I'll look around the room. I'll check. Vice Mayor Buckland.
So I guess my main question after that whole thing is, do you have an update on what is the health of the utility currently?
You know, from a financial standpoint, the health of the utility is good. But I believe that there's a significant amount of deferred maintenance and work that needs to be done. The right-of-way clearing is going to take a significant amount of time, money, resources to get it to, I think, onto a 5 or 6 year clearing schedule, and we'll be talking more about that. I think some of the technology has to be worked on. The substation at Lawing doesn't have electronic communication switches, so we have to send a lineman out 24 miles in like bad weather to do a switch at Lawing. It should be one where you can operate it at the dial house here in town. And you know, I'm getting quotes for that kind of work. So I think the financial condition is good. The revenues are fine, I think, but I don't think we're expending and doing the upkeep that we really need to do. One other thing, there's been no pole testing program in place. So there are poles that are leaning. Norm mentioned there's one right over here going out to SMIC, and I talked to the guys. It's been leaning like that for 3 years. You know, it's like it probably being held up by the wires. So I think we're good, but I think we need to really take a good look at this time to make sure we've got the resources to kind of bring us up to a little bit better level of standard.
So will those items be included with the rate study, because you'll be planning projects ahead?
Yes, and that's why in the slide here it says it's going to be based on budget, and I said and other needs, because I intend to kind of present to you those other needs in dollar cents and make sure that that's baked into the revenue requirements that we're going to have here.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
I do, if you want to go, or I can.
Well, I
keep
don't,
going.
I think that we'll have, did you have another? Okay, we'll let you go.
Okay, I know that we had talked about a while ago, upgrading the system that's going to SMIC to get more power there, and there's going to be more users there. When looking at the broader picture of cost cause or cost payer, how do you see that working out to generate that revenue to bring more power across the bay to SMIC?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it needs to be considered and factored in what we're going to have to do. And I don't know if we have to put in larger transmission lines, but we've got to put in bigger transformers to make sure the power can get to the industrial area there and be utilized. And we're working on that now. But that's something that Mike will also put into the calculation for the industrial user rate and make sure that they're paying for their fair share of that. Sometimes the industrial clients will put in their own transformers. And so we actually kind of reduced their rates because they put in their own kind of industrial infrastructure they needed to do to access our power at higher levels. So we don't have to pay to step it down to like a residential or just a general commercial rate. So that is all going to kind of have to be considered and thought of. But you know, there's a really good story going on over at the harbor, and we got to make sure we've got the power necessary. And actually, we're in the process of putting in a 1,000 kV transformer right now. So that will be considered as we develop and look at it at a commercial industrial rate.
Are you
Yep.
good for now?
Sure.
And then again, it sounds like if there's any questions or if something triggers, we can email you, and I'll let you get going on the clearing.
Okay, everyone else is good. I'm sorry we kind of rushed your
No, I
questions,
think
but
this is a good introduction, and we can kind of start to mull over it.
I'll come back, but that's great. All right, so I started looking around for
Are we
the.
should we
Oh.
keep-
Oh yeah, Mike. I guess we can let Mike get off the phone then.
Mike, it's nice to hear your voice again. I have seen your presentations here in person. We're going to let you go and move on to the right-of-way clearing. Thank you for your information this evening.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Thanks, Corey.
Okay, so one of the things I've discovered since I've gotten here is that the right-of-way clearing it really needs to be stepped up a little bit. And frankly, that's something we see at a lot of utilities. Things have changed externally as far as the warmer temperatures, things are growing faster, things are wetter. guess they're always wet here in Seward. But,
Never
you know,
rains.
so trees fall over easier and we have more outages and it's gonna, if we don't do something, it's gonna get worse. So I thought we really needed to have a right-of-way clearing policy that kind of sets out the goals in a very broad sense. So policy, you know, is not the detail of how you do it, but it's like you need to meet this policy. And so this is a fairly broad goal. It says we're going to have a 6-year clearing program, so that everything should be cleared every 6 years. And I think it's a good thing for us to adopt. And talking about the standards of the clearing and the like, I did find a memo that was addressed to all City of Seward electric customers, and there's one paragraph that says our customary, this is 2014, by the way, 6 years ago. Our customary practice is to chip the branches, limbs, and tree debris or haul it away. The owner may ask to keep the tree materials either whole or chipped by filling out a vegetation clearing form available from the electric department. Lo and behold, there's a vegetation clearing form. So I found that, you know, in one of the files tucked away. And we had a citizen comment that was so good on this. He was saying, hey, can you give us notice? Yes. You know, and absolutely. And can you also, you know, don't leave debris everywhere. And I will tell you, we have had a number of calls and complaints about debris being left. So I think we need to kind of make that and include that in the policy, that we must do the clearing so that it is neat and orderly. I don't know if I want to, generally there's oftentimes the customer wants the wood. They don't want to give it up. So they don't want you just to haul it away. But it usually is stacked and racked, they will call it, so that it's kind of orderly and nice in like 6-foot lengths and the like. We've got some really big lumber here that that is available, you know, and it'll be down. So absolutely we should give notice before we go and do clearing. If we're really being aggressive about the notice, we would go with yellow tags and hang them on the door, say we'll be here in the next week. Someone going out ahead of time to do it. It's cost, you know, put that into the rates, and overall it's good practice and probably worth doing, and it might be a good intern job for someone in a season, or we put it into a contractor requirement if we hire outside contractors, which we are looking at doing. So I think both of those suggestions ought to get incorporated into this policy, and I will do that. So that's what I wanted to kind of tell you, and then I just, to kind of wrap that up, the transmission line is in serious need of clearing, and we had the two of our folks fly the line in a helicopter, videotaped it so we can show it to a contractor and saying, here's what the line looks like. Can you give us a quote or a price? You're seeing transmission clearing costs running somewhere between $10,000 and $13,000 a mile. Chugach clears to the line substation because they have underbilled on our transmission lines. So we've got 24 miles. You probably don't have to come all the way into town. I want to make sure that our crews are okay with contractors doing the work. And I've been talking to them about that, and I think they realize they're busy and they got a lot going on. And so it's really my intent to have a bid go out here middle of January and come back to you in the beginning of February to have the line really cleared. Might be over 2 years if we break up the cost. If it's we'll see what the cost comes in at. You know, it's like how you eat an elephant, like one bite at a time. And then our other crews have all kinds of work they have to do on the distribution lines. And they might even need some help from that just to get them to where we can do a 6-year rotation. So it's one of the priorities I put into place in the 6 months I've been here, and I really want to see the roadmap for this clearing to get done, and that's got to be done, you know, with a policy and also with the financial resources. But we've got the financial resources to do that clearing, and we've got the financial resources to do the upgrades to the substation so we can have, the remote ability to do switches. I will tell you, having to go out there and manually do a switch at a substation, you don't have to worry about cybersecurity. So there is, no one can hack into our system and close and open our substation, put everyone dark, which is a
AI fears.
but with cybersecurity includes physical security. Someone can hop the fence and do it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it's really doable, and the crew that's working, our guys, everyone that's working is really behind it, and they want to see these improvements.
So we're about 3 minutes from needing to take a break. I do have a question though. In between now and January or February when we're able to start this up, are you just identifying like the most hazardous spots and addressing those? Do we have crews addressing any issues that you know about?
They are out clearing from time to time,
Okay.
but it's and sometimes even in the past week with all the snow, they're out knocking off snow off of trees to make sure that they see something that's leaning into a tree. But it's not methodical.
It's not systematic. It's
not,
more like, okay.
like yes, we're kind of not being proactive. We're being responsive, and a little bit is just the numbers of folks we have working, and they always seem to be having to do something, and so anyway, they need some help, and I do want to tell you that they work very hard, and
Yes.
they want to do the work, and they're like, well, give us more overtime, and I'm even at that point, well, I'll do that to some extent, but that's still not going to fix it.
Yes.
They need some support, and they're coming along. We're
So-
having those talks.
So I'm sorry to folks on the phone that I took up our time with that question. I am going to end this work session so that we can have a break before our regular meeting. But I will say, Corey's very responsive to emails. If council has questions, do you want it to at least CC administration on it and have it go to Corey? Is that fine?
Yeah, just CCS would be fine.
So you're aware of it? Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to close the work session and thank Corey. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
let's
Yeah.
take a quick break.